We have a hurting community. We have hurting families. This is a tragic situation.
Right now, we have at least 10 individuals that were struck by gunfire last night in a domestic disturbance. 8 of these individuals are deceased.
Listen, some stories are hard to process even when you have all the facts. Because sometimes the question isn't just what happened, it's how did everything line up like this and nobody could stop it. This case out of Shreveport, Louisiana has shaken people for a reason. Not just because of the scale of what happened, but because of the warning signs that looking back now feel impossible to ignore. And today we're going to break it all down carefully, fact by fact, so you can understand the timeline, the context, and the deeper questions people are still asking. Let's start here. Shamar Elkins wasn't someone who moved around much. Born January 1st, 1995 in Shreveport, he spent most of his life in the same environment, same neighborhood, same surroundings. And from the outside, people described him as normal, a working man, a father, someone who showed up, went to work, came home. But when you start digging deeper, you begin to see a very different picture forming underneath that surface. His upbringing wasn't stable. His biological mother struggled with addiction and wasn't able to raise him, so a family friend stepped in and became his primary caregiver. That matters, because when you look at long-term behavioral patterns, early instability can sometimes show up later in ways people don't immediately recognize. But even with that, there were still periods where his life looked structured. At 18, he joined the Louisiana Army National Guard. He stayed for about 7 years. His roles involved communication systems and coordination, positions that require focus, discipline, and operating under pressure. But here's something important. There's no widely documented support system for his transition back into civilian life after he left. And that transition period, for many people, that's where things begin to shift. After leaving the military, he worked at UPS. Co-workers said he seemed like a family man, but there were signs, small ones, the kind people notice but don't always question. One co-worker mentioned a stress-related habit, pulling his own hair during shifts. That's not something that just appears overnight. That's pressure building over time.
A minute later, 5:59 a.m., dispatch was advised that approximately 9 individuals resided at the location. The caller further stated that the suspect, identified as Shamar Elkins, had shot everyone inside the home. At 6 o'clock a.m., 1 minute later, the caller advised that she and her children had fled from the roof and were now in the backyard. 6:01 a.m., officers arrived on the scene. 6:03, officers made contact with the caller at the residence. At 6:05 approximately, officers requested the Shreveport Fire Department to stage at a nearby location close to Linwood. 6:07 a.m., a second call was received regarding a shooting in the 500 block of Harrison Street. The caller stated that her boyfriend had shot her, taken her 3 children, and fled the scene. 6:08 a.m., the victim identified the suspect as Shamar Elkins. At 6:10, dispatch linked the Harrison Street shooting with the shooting on West 79th Street, and that they all were related. At 6:15, officers received information that the suspect had carjacked a red Kia Sportage at West 79th, closest to Linwood. At 6:17 a.m., our traffic units out on random patrol encountered or observed that particular vehicle traveling southbound on Interstate 49. The officers advised at 6:18 that they were crossing the Red River Bridge into Bossier City. At 6:20, officers received information that the children taken from the Harrison Street residence may be inside of the fleeing vehicle. 6:23 a.m., officers advised that they were exiting near Swan Lake area. 6:25 a.m. approximately, officers located the injured victims from the Harrison Street shooting. 6:29 a.m., officers made contact with the suspect through an exchange of gunfire. At 6:30 a.m., officers confirmed contact with the suspect in the 400 block of Brompton Lane. 6:40 a.m., officers advised that the suspect vehicle was empty and no children were located inside. 6:43 a.m., officers cleared the resident of West 79th Street where multiple deceased victims were located. 7:03 a.m., Shamar Elkins was pronounced deceased at the scene on Brompton Lane. 7:14 a.m., the Shreveport Police Department contacted the Louisiana State Police Investigative Division, and they began their deployment to the Bossier City address to begin to investigate the officer-involved shooting.
There were also legal issues, the WIWI, and a weapons-related incident that resulted in probation. That second case is critical because legally he was not supposed to have access to firearms for years after that. Yet later investigators confirmed he did have access, which raises a major question that's still being looked into. Now we get into what many believe was the turning point. His wife Shanika Pugh filed for divorce. The reason? Infidelity. That alone creates emotional tension, but what makes this more serious is what came before the marriage. According to confirmed reports, there had been a threat made early in the relationship, a statement that if she ever left, things would end in a very tragic way. At the time, it didn't lead to separation. They stayed together. They built a life. But that kind of statement doesn't just disappear. It sits there. A few months before everything happened, there was a documented attempt to harm himself. He was admitted for treatment through the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. He was later released, and according to family, he seemed better. But here's the reality. Appearing okay is not the same as being okay. Shortly after that, he made posts online asking for strength to deal with his thoughts. That's not random. That's someone actively struggling. On Easter, he called family members. He was emotional. He talked about losing his marriage. He talked about feeling overwhelmed. And he said something that now stands out in hindsight. Some people don't come back from their demons. That statement alone, that was a major red flag. But like most families, they tried to comfort him. They believed he could get through it. Because most of the time, people do. The day before everything happened, he spent time with his children, even went out to dinner with one of them, posted about it. Nothing unusual, nothing that would signal what was coming next. And that's what makes this case so unsettling. Because from the outside, there was no clear final moment. There are still ongoing investigations, including how he obtained weapons despite restrictions. There are also unanswered questions about the full scope of his mental state. And then there are the rumors circulating online about other possible factors. But it's important to separate confirmed facts from speculation, because in cases like this, misinformation spreads fast. The city of Shreveport has been deeply affected. Vigils were held, support funds were created, and families are still dealing with the aftermath. Because beyond headlines, this is about real lives, real people, and a situation that left an entire community searching for answers. When a case like this emerges, the media response follows a very familiar but powerful pattern. At first, the coverage is immediate and fragmented, breaking updates, partial timelines, and emotional reactions dominating headlines. Major outlets focus on confirmed facts, while social media accelerates the spread of both information and speculation at a speed traditional reporting cannot match. In this situation, national outlets like CNN and the New York Times quickly moved to verify key elements such as the timeline, family statements, and prior history. Their reporting emphasized documented facts, the divorce filing, the prior legal issues, and the mental health component. However, what's equally important is what they did not do. They avoided amplifying unconfirmed narratives that were already gaining traction online. On the other hand, social platforms like TikTok and Facebook became spaces where theories began forming almost immediately. This is a pattern seen in many high-profile cases. When information is incomplete, audiences naturally try to fill in the gaps. In doing so, speculation can begin to feel like fact, especially when repeated enough times. In this case, discussions around possible hidden aspects of his personal life or deeper motives behind the relationship breakdown began circulating widely despite no official confirmation. This creates a secondary layer to the story, not just what happened, but how people interpret what happened. Another key aspect of the media reaction is the focus on systemic questions. Analysts and commentators began asking whether there were missed intervention points. For example, discussions around mental health support, particularly for individuals transitioning out of military service, became central. The involvement of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs raised questions about follow-up care after release. Was there enough long-term monitoring? Were warning signs adequately addressed? These are not simple questions, and media coverage often reflects that complexity by presenting multiple perspectives rather than definitive conclusions. There is also the issue of how domestic situations are reported. In many cases, the focus shifts toward relationship dynamics, control, emotional pressure, and prior threats. Experts frequently point out that statements made during relationships, especially those involving extreme language, should not be dismissed as just words. Media outlets have increasingly started highlighting this pattern, emphasizing that early warning signs can sometimes escalate if not addressed. However, they are also careful not to imply inevitability. Not every situation with conflict leads to tragedy, and responsible reporting avoids suggesting that outcomes are predetermined. From an analytical standpoint, one of the most striking elements is how multiple risk factors converged within a short period. Relationship breakdown, mental health struggles, prior legal issues, and life transitions all intersected. Individually, each of these factors can be managed or resolved. Together, especially without consistent support systems, they can create a situation where someone feels overwhelmed. That does not excuse actions, but it does help explain the complexity behind them. Understanding that complexity is essential if the goal is prevention in the future. Another important layer is public reaction. Audiences often look for a single clear motive, a reason that makes everything make sense, but cases like this rarely provide that. Instead, they present a combination of factors that, when viewed together, form a broader picture. This can be frustrating because it leaves questions unanswered. However, it also highlights the limitations of trying to reduce complex human behavior to one explanation. Finally, the long-term media narrative tends to shift from what happened to what can be learned. This includes discussions about mental health awareness, relationship safety, and community intervention. While these conversations don't change what occurred, they can influence how similar situations are recognized and addressed in the future, and that's where coverage has the potential to move beyond reporting and into impact. If you made it this far, I want to hear your thoughts, but keep it respectful. These conversations matter. If you want more breakdowns like this, make sure you subscribe to TAS Spectrum West TV, turn on notifications, and drop a like so this video can reach more people. And I'll see you in the next one.